Hi, I'm Janet Day Strelo, one of the two EMM liaisons for Province 2. And today we're talking to Gale Hall, who's a retired early childhood professor who's very active in the Episcopal Migration Caucus. She'll speak to us today about a new course she's spearheaded called Sacred Journeys, Forced Migration and Welcoming the Stranger. So, welcome, Gale.
Thanks.
And maybe you can tell us a little bit about yourself and how you were drawn into the work of Migration with Dignity.
Well, I was a teacher, early childhood teacher for my career, and retired from New Hampshire to Arizona. And in New Hampshire in 2016, we were hearing about all the rhetoric about the criminals that were running the streets. And my friends were saying to me, "Are you going to be safe in Southern Arizona?" And we got here, and none of that was true. And so I'm a quilter. And when I retired, I said to God, please allow me to have time to do my crafts, and please allow me to be of service. And so I started making quilts for children who were, after being released from Border Patrol, were brought to a welcome center in Tucson. And there, they had a craft room, an art room, where children could draw their stories. And the volunteers were using trauma-informed practices and asking them to draw what they loved. And so, as a quilter and a group I was with, we decided to offer fabric squares as another way of children being able to draw what they love, and we could put them into quilts as another way of displaying their art. So that was a big exhibition that started to travel in southern Arizona back in 2019. And at the first opening, I saw people looking at it and appreciating it, but not really getting the art in the way that I knew because I knew some of the stories. So I decided to go to each of the openings and add little bits of pieces of interactive activities to get them to connect more meaningfully with the art. And that was the beginning. And so each place I went, I did it a little differently, and then ended up in Patagonia, Arizona, where I was working with 100 school children over the course of a week who came to the exhibit and experienced the curriculum. And that was kind of the beginning. And for me, that art was transformational because as a teacher and a parent, I have seen children's art my whole life and I love it. But I have never seen a picture that seemed to be depicting a murder in a child's backyard. And looking at this piece, I just was so moved by it and mad at it. And several times looking at it before I even realized it was done by a 5-year-old and thinking that this should not be what's happening to our kids. And so that was like a huge turning point for me. So once we got to Patagonia and put everything together, the next week was COVID and everything shut down. And so I decided, well, what can I do with this now? Let's see if I can create this into maybe an online piece. And I was at a meeting at church with one of my friends, and we walked out into the sanctuary, and she said, this would be a good place for a retreat. And so that started to take all of these ideas to plan into a 3-day desert retreat that we held at our church. It was called Leaving Home: Immigration Through the Eyes of Children. And people from 14 states around the country came to that. We did it 5 times. And that it was really emotional. What we did after that is we Zoomed with each of the cohorts that came so that we could support them in doing whatever they wanted to do in response to what they had learned. So that's kind of how it all got started. And in the midst of all of that, I had the honor of making what's called a migrant quilt for a migrant quilt project here in Arizona. And what happens with that is the woman collects clothing that has been left in the desert by people who are immigrating, cleans them up, goes to the coroner and finds out who had died in the desert based on our desert as deterrence strategy that we have, and asks a quilter or a group of quilters to memorialize all those people in a quilt using the fabric that was in the desert. So I had that year that I did mine, there were 225 people who had died in the desert. And that was incredibly moving. And then through all of this, I started thinking, about all of the negative rhetoric that's happening with towards anybody who's immigrating, the messages of hate. And I thought, well, what could I do to promote messages of respect and of love and of support and of hope? So then I came up with this idea to do a welcome quilt. And my welcome quilts have squares where people draw messages of support and hope. I was just at a border conference this weekend where I asked people there if they would like to make squares that will be in quilts to be sent to Minnesota. So that project kind of started. And and then now we said, all right, let's see what's the next step. And the next step is taking the retreat and creating this formation series called Sacred Journeys. So
Wow,
that's my story.
that is pretty amazing, Gail. And I think you also wrote a book,
Oh yeah.
Lily's Quilt.
So then I wrote this book, Lily's Quilt, which is actually based on a lot of experiences that happened. So I had made a quilt. This is a welcome quilt. I had made that quilt, which was at the Welcome Center. And one of the little girls at the Welcome Center chose my ballerina quilt. And so this is kind of her story, although it isn't her story, it's a combination of stories of why she had to leave home, what it was like on the journey, what it was like to be in detention in cages and wrapped in mylar, and then what it was like to be welcomed at the center and then into a new community. And now, how are they going to look at welcoming new people into their lives as well?
Okay. Uh, and I think you're still doing this and still asking for quilt squares
Yes,
involvement
yes.
from
So my
people.
project is called the Welcome Quilt Project. People can just search that, the Welcome Quilt Project. There's a website that we just started. I'm doing this in collaboration with a group called Voices from the Border in Patagonia, Arizona. And so that's where you can go and find out information. There's a whole toolkit that I created about how to make the quilts and how to do activities with people once you've displayed the quilts or had an exhibit. So there was an exhibit of the quilts that traveled through Wisconsin for a year to 5 different churches. And they implemented the curriculum with their congregations and their communities so that it was not just looking at the quilts, but taking the messages of the quilts and bringing them into their community to help people to kind of discern for themselves, what might I want to do now that I know this information? And start a dialogue on immigration.
Excellent. And that's what we need. Lots of
Yeah.
dialogue about immigration. So back to Sacred Journeys. What is the goal of the course?
Well, for me, when I think about attending something where I'm learning something, I don't want it to just be a kind of, well, that was interesting and that's the end. I want it to be something with how do I take that information and apply it in a meaningful way? So the goal of Sacred Journeys is very much educational to let people to understand the different aspects around migration. So and we're utilizing children's artwork that was from Casa Alitas within it. So in Sacred Journeys, it's an empathy-based activity series. And we talk about why people leave home, the push-pull factors of migration, the history of U.S. interference, especially in Central America, and what that was like for children to be children of war. Deterrence strategies of our country, desert as deterrence, the wall separating families, language and dehumanization and racism. We look at the trauma that is impacting everybody that's part of this whole system. And this is trauma that is being done on our behalf. Is it the policies of our country? So are we okay with that or not? We look at detention, we look at deportation. I'm flipping through my little cheat sheet here. And then we look at belonging, who belongs and who does not, and who decides that, because ultimately immigration is about belonging. And then we end with living into our baptismal covenant of striving for justice and peace for all people. So the last class is now that you know and you can't unknow, what are you going to do? And so, what we'll do, again, like we did with the retreat, is encourage all the facilitators to connect back up with their groups as they decide what it is they want to do, either individually or in small groups, or as a whole group, based on what really touched them as they went through the program. So it's about taking action. And then what we want to also do is to take all of those cohorts and get them connected with each other. Because maybe there's a group in Connecticut that's doing something that a group in Iowa would look at and say, oh my gosh, that would really work here. So to find a place on our website to document all of that so that people can contact each other and share ideas and maybe start working together on some things. Maybe get us out of the silos that we're all in.
Exactly. I think the networking is so critical. And the more we talk and the more we exchange, the better off we are. Um, so it seems as if, one really big goal is to get people to almost physically feel what it is like to be a forced migrant. Maybe you can talk a little bit about the backpack exercise that you
Yes.
have.
Well, one of the things that I did is I looked at, as a teacher, this is such a God thing. I look back at my whole career that I thought I was making good choices about and realized that God's hand was on everything. And it's like my whole career was a preparation for my retirement. I truly believe that. And I was able to look back at different activities I did with my students that really touched them and do some tweaking with them to have them connect up with immigration. So for this whole idea about if you had to suddenly leave, if you're impacted by forced migration, and in my book, Lily is, she has to leave tomorrow, and her mother asks, what are you going to bring in your backpack? And it must fit. So when the welcome quilts, they were on display at the Tucson History Museum, the Arizona History Museum in Tucson, and we invited school groups and community groups to come in. And I always did this backpack activity with them, where I asked them to write down if they had to leave tomorrow, what would they bring in their backpack? And it had to be something that would fit and that they would carry. And then after they thought about that for a few minutes, each person would come up and stand in front of the group. And I had a backpack, and they would physically put their paper in the backpack and share what that item was and why they would bring it. And then the group could ask them some clarifying questions. And for me, is such a moving thing. One of the things that children and adults, but children want to bring their pets. And so that's typically something that they say they would bring their dog. And so then their classmates would ask them, well, will your dog fit in your backpack? And they said, yes, it's just a little dog. And then they're asked, well, how are you going to feed your dog? Well, there's enough room in there for me to bring food for the dog. Okay, well, if the backpack is unzipped, the dog might jump out and run away and get hurt in the desert. Well, then I'll zip the backpack. But then if you zip the backpack, the dog won't be able to breathe. Well, then I'll cut a hole in the front of the backpack so he can stick his nose out. And what if you run out of food? And so it's this back and forth, this problem solving, which is wonderful, which often leads kids to say, maybe I should leave my pet at home with a neighbor, and that sense of loss that they have from their pet. And this was also inspired by the children's artwork. So many of them drew pictures of their pets that they had to leave home. And by drawing them, they could honor their pets and not have to bother their parents right then and there who were working, for other things. So we do this thing to try to make it personal. And then another little girl wanted to bring a necklace, and she said that it was from her grandmother and that her grandmother had recently died, and she wanted to have it with her always because her grandmother loved her and she loved her grandma. And so I stood up and put my arm around her, and she threw her arms around my waist and just started crying. And her classmates are all just, like looking like what's happening. And I said, it's really special to have memories of people who are really important in our life. And that's what that necklace represents to whoever the girl's name was. And you all understand that, don't you? And they all were nodding the importance of having those things. And then she went to sit back down with her friend, and her friend put her arm around her, and everybody watched as she went. And I said, "Isn't it wonderful to have a friend that can help us when we're feeling sad?" So it really brings up all this emotional stuff, which is what makes this different from other kinds of formation series. It's not just talking about books, it's not just talking about movies, it's experiencing things firsthand that will develop empathy and put ourselves in a different position to say, what if that was me? And now that I know and I can't unknow, what'll I do?
Yeah. And I think also that one of the exercises is once you've made it to the border and you have to leave your backpack.
And that's the, yeah. And
Well,
that's the other thing that I do is I take the backpack, and after everybody's ideas are in it and we all shared what we put in and why, then I take the backpack and I throw it in the garbage.
oh,
And not because that's the reality of what often happens at the border. And I did this with a group of adults, and one of the women sitting next to the garbage, she was so unsettled by it. And after 10 minutes, she went over and she grabbed the backpack out of the garbage. She said, "I just can't stand this, to think that this is what our country is doing." And so again, that's, how do we connect up and um, try to understand it from a different perspective?
yeah.
Another activity that we do in this is around labeling. And so I put a label, an actual word on your back, and we all talk to you as if you are that. And you get to feel what it feels like. And if it's a good label, it feels good. If it's not, it's pretty devastating. And then that leads us into a conversation about all of the dehumanization that's happening with language that's going on right now. And how do we counteract that? How do we change? How do we use people first language? How do we change our perceptions from, I'm automatically looking at this in a negative way. How can I start approaching it in a positive way? And it takes practice, but the results are wonderful. So those are a couple of the activities we do.
So, how many pilot programs do you have, or are you going to be starting?
I think there's 9 cohorts that are interested. Several in California, one in Texas, one in Montana, one in Colorado. So yeah,
Excellent. And this is a 12,
it's a 10-week
10
series.
week series.
Yep.
Thank you.
In meeting with different groups as this has been planned, they were seeming to say, 10 weeks feels really good, 12-week may be a little too much. And what we're looking at is having the pilot cohorts are going to be so important to this because they are going to give feedback on what really worked for them and what really didn't work for them
Mhm.
and help to shape what this will be so that all of those changes can be made before it is shared with the whole church-wide. And so we're really looking for their honest feedback on what touched them, what could be changed, what was missing. So we're really counting on their expertise from being the participants.
And if there are still churches out there that would like to be part of these pilot programs, can they get in touch with you, or is it kind of set right now?
No, it definitely can happen. I'm working on creating an online learning management system, like a kind of like a website where all of this information will be hosted. And the facilitators, I'm going to be meeting with the facilitators every week to make sure that they understand what the lesson is about and how to carry it out. Also creating some, at the last retreat, which was organized by Leanne Culbreth, who is one of the caucus's organizers. Uh, we we on purpose filmed it because some of the activities, yeah, I can write them up and describe them, but if you can see them in action, then when you look at it as a facilitator, you feel more confident about doing it. So there will be these videotapes of activities as well that facilitators can look at to better understand what it means to facilitate that particular class. And then every week we'll meet up and answer any questions, talk about anything that maybe came up during the week that they want to share, and try to develop that community of facilitators as well.
And when do you expect then, so you've got the pilot program and you have all of the feedback. When do you think it'll be ready to offer to the entire church?
Well, part of a def my goal is to have it done by the end of the fall.
Okay.
And since Migration with Dignity Sunday is typically early in February, um, I was thinking how it might make a lot of sense to be able to really just offer it and as at that time, that would be a when since we're talking about migration with dignity on Sunday, that Sunday, then people can maybe begin this program right after that. And individual groups can decide how they want to do it. They might want to do it every week. I think that would be a lot because it's so emotional. They might want to do every other week. They might want to do once a month. We're looking at different ways of offering it. Maybe you'd like to offer it in sections. So these first few sections about the beginning parts of it, and then later talking about what's going on in our country right now. That's another thing we'll be looking for feedback from people is, how they think it might be packaged in different ways. And then to offer it online as well for groups who are more rural and don't have the opportunity to come together in person. And I used to teach online classes, and so I've done many of these activities in an online format. And sometimes it just blows me away how intense it can be, perhaps because you're not face to face with somebody and you end up being more honest. I don't know, but that's had been my experience with some of these things with my online students that they got very, very involved and deep. So we're looking at all of that, but my goal is that next year it's ready to go.
That would be great, because certainly here in the Convocation of Episcopal Churches in Europe, we're so spread apart. Um, and it would be wonderful to be able to do this online because we have such a huge interest and experience with migration and forced migration and asylum seekers. So that sounds like a great timeline.
Cool.
So do you have anything else that you would like to add? Maybe you want to show us some of the books that are recommended for this course, because I think, again, the fact that we're looking to get people to be empathetic, so folks that may not be dealing um, with migrants, forced migrants, or asylum seekers on a regular basis, don't know any, but they can still feel what it is like that they are going through.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of books that we're going to recommend as recommended reading, trying to see, all of those could not be incorporated into this, so it was hard to break it down. But here's a little additional piece. When we were videotaping this, we had two wonderful guests who came and told their stories. Her name is Dora Rodriguez, and she kind of started the sanctuary movement here in Tucson. And in 1980, she left El Salvador. She had to flee for her life with a group of 26 people, and half of them died in the desert, and she almost died. And there's a picture that was on Life magazine of her being rescued from the desert. And this woman she's just amazing. She has just written a book about her story and is traveling around. So she actually came to our last retreat and told us her story. So that's on videotape. So people will get to meet Dora and hear her story right from her. And then there's another woman, her name is Sister Lika. And here in Arizona, there are several churches that support a center, a welcome center in Nogales, Sonora, in Mexico, that Sister Lika started 5 years ago. And in that welcome center, they do all kinds of things to help people also build skills that they could use once they have come into the United States. And so she was there as well, and she told her story in Spanish and was translated as she told it. And so people will get to hear that as well. And then in terms of the books that we decided on this book called Detained. I actually heard about it from somebody at a Episcopal migration meeting, and he was so enthusiastic about it that I went out and got it, and it's so moving. It's written by a teenager on his experience being held in detention. He had a like a notebook that he wrote in every day. And so this is his story right from his own experience, and it's extremely moving. So that's going to be one of them. Another book is this book called Beyond Welcome by Karen Gonzalez, and she immigrated from Guatemala and is a clergy person. And I've read a lot of books that tell people stories. This book was really challenging to me because it got me to think about what is my role as somebody welcoming and who am I doing this for, and how do I do it in an effective way by reaching out to the people who are here and finding out what they need rather than making the assumption from my point of view and talking about the language we use. It's going to be challenging to people, and that's what I love about it because we need to think in challenging ways. So those are our, and then my Lily's quilt, that'll be part of it as well,
Mhm.
um, with a story. And then we're going to have a couple of children's books throughout. I think the children's books I always read to adults with children's books too, and they sometimes help us to look at a tough topic in a familiar way. You know, we've been read to and feels good to be read to. When we were piloting the retreat, we were reading a book about trauma, and David Chavez, who was the border missioner for Arizona's diocese, was there. He goes, "It felt so good just to be read to." And to take it in that way. So another book we'll be using is this book called Hear My Voice, which is it has the pictures of it's all stories that were told by children in detention. And the illustrations are all drawn by different illustrators, but it brings their words to life. So it's another perspective on mostly younger children.
No, that is great. I really am looking forward um, to actually taking part in the course when it comes up again
Me too.
next year. But thank you so much, Gail. This is, I think, exactly what we need right now. And I hope that people will be moved enough um, to read, to take part in these, if they're taking part in your cohorts, but just to listen and to understand, you know, what it is like to be a forced migrant.
Yes. And then, like I said, to me, what are you going to do now? With our retreat, I remember one woman went back and she decided she lived in Georgia, I think, and she was going to start a book club that was all about books that were written by people who had migrated and start that in her community. Another group in North Carolina went back and they decided they were going to start a community garden for everybody in their community. Another woman went back and thought, all right, I need to find a place where I can volunteer directly with people who are immigrating. Other people said, I need to share with my church community what I learned and started to use it as an educational opportunity. So it allows everybody to connect in on what one of our colleagues in all this work, Rex McKee in Minnesota, has created something called the ladder of engagement. So there's many different ways to get involved that will allow you to enter in a way that you feel comfortable and challenged, but not overwhelmed. So that's what we're looking at.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for taking the
Thank
time
you. This
today.
was fun.
Yes, it was wonderful, and wishing you a good week and all the success with Sacred Journeys.
Thank you, Janet.
Okay, thank you.